Good afternoon. I'm sorry. I'm Mel Webb with Urban Renaissance Group, and I serve on the NAIOP Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Welcome to Recruitment, Retention, and Relationships. Thank you so much for joining us for this important panel and discussion. The format of this event is a little different from our regular structure. Our panel will speak for the first hour, during which time we invite you to submit questions in the questions feature to the right. There will be time near the end of the panel for a moderated Q&A, and we may incorporate your audience questions during the discussion as it evolves. And instead of the pre-webinar networking, we will have our social lounge open after the panel for 30 minutes of networking and dialogue about all the topics that we discussed today. Our speakers and other DEI committee members will be located throughout the lounge, and we encourage you to start these conversations based on your reflections and your thoughts about the presentation. And events like these would not be possible without the continued support of our sponsors, DPR Construction, Hermanson Company, Holland Partner Group, Hudson Pacific, MG2, Schuchart Corporation, Skanska, Stokes Lawrence, Boots Construction, Gensler, Invesco, LBA Realty, McKinstry, Mortensen, Callison RTKL, Coughlin Porter Lundin, DWS, and PSS Mechanical. At this time, I'd like to introduce Darby DuComb, who's of Counsel with Yarmuth and who will moderate this discussion. Darby.
Thanks so much, Mel. Welcome, everybody. It's great to be here. I think we're going to have a really great panel today. A little background on me. I've been a NAIOP Washington member for about 3 years. I'm co-chair of the Government Affairs Committee, and just this year joined NAIOP Washington's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. I've been a racial equity continuing legal instructor for about 10 years. For the Washington State Bar Association and for Washington State Attorney Generals Rob McKenna and Bob Ferguson. I also taught race and the law at the UW Law School for a couple of years. And I'm just super excited to be a part of the panel today. So let's get started. Today we're going to have a conversation with people living, breathing, and working in the commercial real estate right here in our local community. We do not expect them to be experts, but we're here to listen to them about their experiences and their ideas for how we can move the ball forward in commercial real estate. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Deji Odesanya he's an acquisition and asset manager at Pilot Ventures, Nicole DeLeon, an attorney at Cairncross and Hempelmann, and Okezie, Director of Development at HomeSight. So let's start with a little personal background from each of you. I think like you, like a lot of people in Seattle, I know myself included, even though I've been here 25 years, I came here by way of Indiana, Arizona, and Oregon, where I met my husband in law school, who is a Seattleite. How did you come to live in Seattle?
Thanks, Darby. For everyone, my name is Deji. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. Moved to Seattle in 2016 by the way of right after grad school at Darden School of Business at University of Virginia. Moved here to work for Microsoft. Prior to going to business school, I'd spent time working in corporate banking as well as real estate. And I had the itch to get back in the industry again. So after 2 years at Microsoft, got back in the industry. And currently, at Pilot Ventures doing acquisitions, asset management, also helping out on the advisory side, on the broker side as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Deji. Hi, all. My name is Nicole DeLeon. I'm a land use attorney at Cairncross and Hempelmann. Really happy to be here and looking forward to this discussion. So similar to, I think, everybody on this call, I'm also a transplant. I grew up in Los Angeles, California, at Pasadena. Went to school at UC Berkeley. My apologies to the Huskies in the audience. I know we usually, foil your football season, so I'm sorry. But yeah, then I moved back down to Los Angeles. And for some reason, I think most of my family is still perplexed by, I felt compelled to move to the Northwest and to enjoy the beautiful sunshine that we experience here. But I primarily came up here to attend law school. I went to Seattle University, and I was fortunate enough right out of law school to get a job with the law firm Cairncross and Hempelmann, and I've never wanted to leave since. So I'm also on the diversity committee at Cairncross and Hempelmann. I also do a lot of pro bono work as well. I provide legal services for the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, and I also work with the Promise of Justice Institute out of Louisiana, which helps with unconstitutional criminal issues out in Louisiana. So again, really looking forward to this conversation, really happy to be here. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Uche Okezie. As Darby mentioned, I am the Real Estate Development Director at HomeSight, and I'm also part of the Transplant Club. I was born in upstate New York, and my parents were Nigerian and moved here to the States in the late 60s. I grew up in northern Alabama, got my bachelor's in urban studies at the University of New Orleans, and then spent the next 5 years sort of making my way west till I got to Seattle, where I earned my master's in urban planning at the UW. Huskies. And I remember one of my first thoughts when I got to Seattle was how different the air smelled. So green, and then the lack of humidity was like a definite delight. So I decided this is where I'm going to stay and buy furniture.
That's great. Thanks so much. And so how does Seattle compare to your hometown, where you came from?
Yeah, I mean, good question. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. So, Georgia is, more diverse. It's different. But, overall, really enjoying my time in Seattle. I'd spent time in DC, lived in DC for close to 7 years prior to going to grad school. So, moving to Seattle in 2016, I've been fortunate to make friends both in the tech industry as well as the real estate industry. So overall, great experience so far, but again, still very different.
Yeah, and I think it's, not too surprising to anybody here to understand that living in Los Angeles, so, a few hours from the Mexican border, I am Hispanic, is quite different than living a few hours from the Canadian border. So yeah, it's definitely less diverse in Los Angeles, that's for sure. Definitely less diverse than Berkeley. But that being said, I've really enjoyed my experience here, and I've had the opportunity to, as I mentioned, engage in what is a pretty diverse atmosphere in a lot of different respects in Seattle. So I think that's definitely also changing and evolving. And, given that we're having these conversations, I really look forward to Seattle increasing its diversity efforts and seeing more of that come to fruition.
Yes, same with Deji and Nicole. I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, and the diversity there was slightly different than Seattle. Huntsville is like a hub of research and development. NASA has a presence there. There's also a military base. So all of these things help to create that diversity in terms of technical talent and expertise than you would expect to see in a small southern town, but definitely different than the mix that's here in Seattle. Because Seattle, even though it's a big town, it has that small town feel to it. So.
Thanks, everyone. So let's turn to recruitment. If anyone in the audience has a question on the topic of recruitment, feel free to drop it in the chat and we'll take it up in a few minutes. So tell me, how did you come to your current position? Were you recruited? Did you respond to an ad? Did you just know someone? How did you get your current role, your current job?
Yeah, for me, I was on a property tour when I did a brief stint at a prior, shop in Seattle. Met one of the principals at Pilot Ventures, and after a few different conversations about my skill set and how I can drive impact for him. My background is more data analytics. I really understood how to think about doing the valuations and joint ventures, and he felt that I could really drive impact for his firm. And through our various conversations and meet some of the team members and his partner, came to join the firm, and been there for close to 2 years now, where I've been able to drive impact across acquisitions, asset management, as well as the advisory side of the business for the company.
My path is actually a bit unique to law schools and law firms. Specifically, I was fortunate enough that I did pretty well in law school, and law schools and law firms, they have more or less a framework, a hiring framework in place where for top performing students, you can go through what can only be described as a gauntlet of interviews. But you go through a gauntlet of interviews with, about 10 or so firms each one of those interview components consists of, meeting with about 9 or so people at each individual firm. But what was really interesting about my experience was, with Cairncross specifically, there were maybe 2 or 3 firms that actually specifically offered a diversity scholarship, and Cairncross was one of those. So not only was there, a competitive compensation package, which of course is, important across the board, but Cairncross caught my eye in the sense that they offered that extra diversity package or that extra diversity scholarship, which, to be totally honest, looking back now that I'm fully employed, it wasn't a significant sum, but it was something. It was something to help me, pay for law school. And it also showed me that they were thinking about diversity. So I went through that whole process with them, met with, again, a very wonderful diverse candidate or diverse panel of interviewers. And that also spoke to me. So ultimately, after, getting some offers and going through the full gauntlet of interviews, I landed at Cairncross, and I've been there ever since. So, yeah.
Yeah, with me, I think, it started in grad school with my decision to work in the nonprofit real estate development sector. And so I wasn't recruited and I didn't know anyone or respond to an ad. I sent my resume via the postal service, because this is before Monster and LinkedIn, to all of the affordable housing developers that belong to HTC, which is a consortium of organizations that address, housing needs for low and moderate income folks. So it only takes one agency in HomeSight, which is based in South Seattle, was the agency that responded and invited me for an interview. And I was impressed and comforted by the fact that the interview team, we had one interview, included women and a person of color. And when they offered me a position, I was really excited to accept. And, the rest, as they say, is history.
Great. Just want to build on a comment that Nicole, made about, her process and going to law school and landing a job at, at a top law firm. For me, when I went to grad school, part of my goal was to work for an institutional, platform, Tishman-inspired travel crow type shop. And, while in grad school, I did case competitions at, UNC, UT Austin McCombs. But we only had 2 firms come recruit at the MBA level. And, when you owe, $100,000, of debt, your only option is to, join a firm that has unique values that kind of cater to your goals and where you can also drive, impact as well. So that's what brought me here. That's what brought me here to Seattle to work for Microsoft. And then after that, got back in real estate again after paying off, my grad school debt. So, as firms think about, recruitment, whether it's at the MBA level or at the law school level or just broader master's degree, go to some of those, schools to recruit would help increase diverse candidates to get back in the real estate industry.
That's a great segue. Thanks. And so what ideas do you have for firms who want to get serious about diversifying their recruitment plans, their recruitment efforts?
Sure. As I think, over the past, 5-10 years, you've had programs like, Project REAP to help experienced professionals who work in other industries get into commercial real estate. At the MBA level, you have programs like, MLT, the Twigo Foundation. I also got, a consortium fellowship while in grad school. So you have programs similar to that. And then also, through mentorship, both at the undergrad and grad school level, companies can find different avenues to recruit diverse talent.
Yeah, I think building on that and Deji's earlier comment, I think, recruitment is one thing, but I think what companies need to think about is kind of this pre-recruitment phase as well. I don't think it would really surprise anybody who's, in attendance here that a diverse candidate, all things being equal, a competitive compensation package, wonderful people who work at the company, all things being equal, a diverse candidate is probably going to gravitate towards a company that, either has existing diversity or can demonstrate a commitment to diversity. And so, if you're looking at your interview panel and, they're primarily Caucasian, that's one thing that can't be changed in that moment, right? But there are tools, you can have an arsenal of examples that demonstrate your company's commitment to diversity. And I think that's something that can, essentially start today. Some examples of that are, as Deji mentioned, mentoring. That doesn't cost anything. Yes, it's a time commitment, but if you go out and mentor somebody and you're able to talk about that effort that you are, committing as a firm or as a company, and if you're able to talk about when you're dealing with a diverse candidate, I think that'll go a long way to showing that person that you really are committed to those efforts. Again, I think, Cairncross did this really well with me where, they did offer that diversity scholarship. I think at the time, it's coming back to me, maybe it was about, I'm going to be honest, it was in the, several $1,000s. It was not something that broke the bank. That's something that, I think most companies on this panel, they could stomach that. And it's something that's significant enough to the candidate that, again, just really shows that the company is thinking about diversity. And it might be just enough to make you a little bit more competitive when a diverse candidate, again, looking at all things equal, is trying to evaluate where they want to end up. So again, I think it's that pre-recruitment phase. And as Deji mentioned too, I think it's also really important to utilize those relationships and establish those relationships early. If you're going on to campuses or if you're setting up internships, mentoring opportunities, just establishing that relationship, you're becoming a known, relationship ally in person of color communities. And that can go a long way too. I think even if, that particular intern isn't going to be a permanent employee at your company, you've now inserted yourself and your company name in that community. And, as we all know, relationships, referrals, those are all really critical to hiring. So I think just getting yourself in the game is a really important component.
Definitely. And, in terms of getting into the game, I think it's important to be able to provide networking opportunities, that support and encourage folks, either whether they're with your company already or they're a prospect, or they're brand new, so that they feel comfortable about making those relationship connections, and by providing those network opportunities, you show the makeup of your staff, your organization, the folks that you work with, and also encourage that pipeline of having diverse organizational staff and leadership. Because that will signal to your staff, it will signal to your partners what your commitment is.
Absolutely. I mean, I think for me over the last, couple of years, I go back in the industry here again in Seattle. I've tried my best to network and meet some of the, people I truly respect in the industry. And some of them become indirect mentors for me. So as I think about guys like, Ed McGovern at Security Properties or, Tom Hoban at Coast Equity Partners, even guys like, Dylan Simon at, Kidder Matthews. Those are, guys who are white guys who, when I've either been going through a challenging time in my professional experience, I've asked them for help or guidance to try to think about, the best way to navigate, what I'm going through. And they've kind of been a good resource to help think through and further build my network in the Puget Sound real estate industry.
That's great. Thanks, guys. And so let's move on to retention. I found when I was managing the city attorney's office and doing exit interviews with some of my employees that critical mass of people of color in a work environment can be really important to retention. And at the same time, that can be a real challenge to achieve. It also takes genuine relationships and building trust in one another, and that takes time. What do you think it takes to retain a diverse workforce, and what techniques have you seen used that you've seen be successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, to retain, strong, talent, that comes from the top, and it has to be intentional in their approach to, it's just not recruiting diverse talent and saying, well, we check this box, we have a quota of, minorities at our firm. I think it also comes down to, the intentionality, right? And making sure that, they get buy-in from middle management as well as, from the guys who are up and comers within the organization to help kind of drive that impact and make sure it's an inclusive environment.
companies walk away realizing that diversity, it's a continuing process. And, just because you have now hired one diverse person and means that you can check that diversity box, that's not the end of the effort or the discussion. To actually retain that person, it's a continued effort. And I think it means that you have to continue with all the things that we've been talking about, whether it's, presenting those diversity efforts, the mentoring, and just really creating the environment that affirms that commitment to diversity throughout the course of, a company's life cycle, right? It's not just even about recruitment, it's about this holistic, bigger picture. I think that's kind of the big, broad brushstroke. As Deji mentioned, it starts at the top and it should be a consistent, encouraging message throughout the company. But I also think, there's some really individual things that people can do too. There's this term thrown out about, constantly wanting to be an ally, right? Be an ally to people of color. And I think, in this instance, what some of us have in terms of, being industry leaders, there are so many tools that you have in your toolbox that you could share with people of color. And, I know I am particular, I was really lucky where I had Nancy Rogers and John Hempelmann specifically, who really took me under their wing. And I think what that meant for me is once I was in at Cairncross, they didn't stop there. They wanted to bring me into the industry as a whole. So, bringing me to events, and it's not just bringing you to an event and then, taking off and abandoning you there on your own to deal with all the fun that can be networking, but really introducing you to people and making sure that you're making those connections. The real estate industry is all about connections. And, as evidenced by this panel, diverse candidates, diverse talent, the interesting nuance with us is a lot of us tend to not be from around here. So we don't really have that benefit of those established connections of growing up in Seattle and, knowing the high school friends who are, now the heads at all of our, competitor and client companies. So I think just really being that ally and sense of taking ownership of, a person of color's success in the sense that you want to help them and share the tools that you have. So I think that's really important in terms of retention, because it makes that person just feel like, yeah, they're a member of your team and you're invested in them.
And, to continue with what Nicole is saying about investing in your team members, it also includes, your firm's back of the house in a sense, the human resources, the principles and practices, that you use to promote and reinforce, your commitment to diversity and inclusion. How do you do promotions? Do pay raises occur? Are they based on skill, or is it based on how long you've been, tenure? How do you hire? Where do you go for your prospective talent? How do you reach out? Who do you reach out to recruit that? Are you nurturing your BIPOC employees in terms of professional development so that they stay in the field? You create leadership opportunities for them, whether it's leading a project, being in charge of a deal or a department, or even, being in a leadership role in the organization. So those are also important in terms of retention, because then an employee feels like, yes, I can invest my time and my talent with this organization because I know it's going to take me someplace that I want to go.
Great. And so where do we go from here? In my experience, trying to deploy a racial equity initiative across a huge organization like the city of Seattle that had 12,000 employees, it took consistent leadership from the top. It took mid-manager buy-in. It took engagement from junior level staff. And it took a lot of consistency and hard work. And when we started to suffer a lot of turnover at the top, it was hard to maintain the momentum. I wonder what you think we can do to build the momentum in commercial real estate and keep the momentum going.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's, making sure that, you feel like as if your voice is heard from, senior leadership. I recently came across a study by the National Association of Real Estate Investment Managers that said that, it's, from, and these are steps in the right direction. But I mean, from, I think, 2016 to 2021, you had diverse executives go from, I believe, 10 to about 15% in the real estate, industry. And then, it's little small, things like that. As long as we're moving in the right direction as an industry And, you have leadership, going out, to various events, whether it's, schools like, Morehouse that, Mark Washington went to, in Seattle. Morehouse is actually in Atlanta, but, Mark Washington is a real estate executive at Eastville in Seattle. Going there to recruit, talent and supporting talent to be their best. I think, you have a strong, diverse population, in the industry in the near future who will be able to drive impact and help the industry grow.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, we're having this conversation, right? So we're headed in the right direction. It's definitely positive. The statistics are apparently showing that, change is happening, and that's great. And there is more diversity coming to the real estate industry. And I think that's a good thing. And I also think Deji's right that, companies need to utilize whatever, diversity assets they have. And, whether or not that's, kind of engaging with their diverse talent and asking, first asking, don't tell, but ask them if they want to help with that effort, if they want to be, kind of ambassadors of that diverse change. And, I think that also touches back on the retention issue that we were just talking about, which is, again, getting that buy-in from your current talent to kind of beget more diverse talent, right? So I think that's critical. I also think in the real estate industry, I think we can use a bit of our competitive nature to our advantage on this front. I'm a lawyer. Lawyers are pretty competitive. I think if we all start, again, just having the conversations and frankly, start celebrating some of these ideas and some of these efforts and advertising them, talk about what, other companies are doing, what your efforts are, the fact that you're mentoring, the fact that you have the scholarship opportunity. And I think that's going to kind of start upping the ante and putting pressure on our other companies and getting others into the game. I think once we start making this more of the status quo as opposed to something that we're all aspiring to, I think that's when we're really going to see a really positive critical shift. So I think, I'm probably going to be going back to my firm and saying, hey, I think we should, be posting on LinkedIn more about this or something. But I think that's a good place to keep the momentum going.
Absolutely. Don't take your foot off the gas. It's, in this current moment, we have an opportunity to really explore and be okay with being uncomfortable as we're trying to make these positive shifts, and diversifying your talent can only improve your organization's capacity, right? I think it's important to understand how much more can be produced and accomplished by having that richness of ideas and lived experiences that a diverse staff can bring to your organization. And, it's important to encourage that and acknowledge that by actively and intentionally trying to recruit based on the skills and the talent. And of course, naturally, what will follow is that diversity.
And I think building on that too, we talk about diversity in recruitment, and I think it sounds like it's this big, scary thing, right? And, if you're looking at your executive leadership team and your middle management team and you don't see any people of color on that, you are hopefully going to try and change that. But I think we all realize that it's turned into a really kind of daunting prospect, but it doesn't really have to be. I think, one of the messages that we've all been talking about is there are discrete things that are very, very manageable that will actually result in very measurable efforts to diversity. I know in my firm, we do things like encouraging people to have an MLK day of volunteering, things like that, where you're just, again, kind of chipping away and demonstrating diversity and a commitment to diversity, which, to Uche's point, is going to encourage that diverse talent to come to your company. Again, I think it's just planting those seeds and, watching them hopefully grow and flourish into diversity across the board.
Thanks so much, everyone. I know when we were working on revamping our hiring practices at the city attorney's office, one question we added to the interview process was just, why do you think people are poor? And it was so illuminating. We would get a wide spectrum of answers, but it really does give you a window into, people and what they're thinking and how they orientate themselves to the rest of the world. It really was effective. And it was just one simple question we added to, 12 other questions as part of an interview process. But it was really a great conversation starter. Do we have any questions from the audience? Does anybody want to join in the conversation with us? We've got a few more minutes and would love to hear what you're all thinking, hear what you want to know about more. Everyone wants to jump right into networking and go meet with their buddies afterwards. How about you guys? Do you have any closing remarks? You want to give us one last bit of nugget before we sign off?
I'll say for me, it's just, companies as they think about, recruiting diverse candidates, it's, not just the, tapping your buddy and asking him, who he knows in the industry. It's, posting online, as I think Uche, and Nicole have mentioned as well, because that way you get, a more diverse, stronger pool of talent. I can think of friends that work at, big investment banks like Evercore in New York City that have said, well, I'm not sure if I want to work in the real estate industry because of these particular challenges. And, it's a big passion of mine. So, I'm going to do whatever I can do to stay in the industry. But it's just, firms just being more, I'll say more inclusive and being broader about their scope and thinking about, how to find that particular talent, especially in a world, where today, folks are working remotely and, you can definitely post things on LinkedIn, select leaders and other platforms outside of just those channels of, outside of the schools that a lot of, executives, go to recruit talent at.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. I also, again, I just think that diversity, it has to start somewhere. And again, understanding that it can be a bit daunting. I think it's just really important for companies to, not you can do that, aren't going to require frankly, a ton of effort. It's the little things of reaching out, being an ally, and mentoring and encouraging, I think, from that pre-recruitment phase all the way through retention, just to continue those efforts. It's really important.
Uche, I have a question, and I think your story about the national office bringing in resources to your firm would be a great story. Who else is doing this well, and what's the culture practice of celebrating that?
Wow. Do you mean in the real estate development sector, or?
Yeah, I mean, well, this is a question that came in, but I just think about your experience with the national office, bringing in professional resources, really supporting the local office's work at your firm. And I love the name of your team, Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. You're ready, and how do we stay ready, right? Mm-hmm. But I thought you could give us a little window into how well received that was for you here locally in your local office, and how getting the support from the national office really helped the team, be successful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, our organization has always really tried, because we're located in South Seattle, which is already a really diverse community, and understanding the challenges and the desire to have the opportunity to create generational wealth, to improve your family circumstances. That's always been part of our mission. And so to have the NeighborWorks organization really devote resources to bringing that forward and really, in a sense, institutionalizing that work was really, really great. And I think, as Deji and Nicole have both said, they started with bringing in those tools and educating the leadership, understanding that it starts at the top, And then if you see your leaders in your organization really support and promote this work, then it sort of gives you that confidence to continue to do that, both within your organization as well as with your external partners, because you have that backing. And so for us, it was really great to see that support, because that meant that we could continue with our efforts and really push it out to other organizations as well.
And is there anything you guys do to celebrate your triumphs along the way and to celebrate your accomplishments?
We have a fun committee at our organization. And so every month we celebrate a particular culture and really have that as a theme. And I think it's just really great when we know that we are having a positive impact in the community as well that we work with. And so I think, it's sort of, it's those small things where you can pat yourself on the back, and so that's really good.
Thank you. Thank you. Nicole, so we've got a question for you. What does a relationship ally look like?
A relationship ally. I think a relationship ally, I think it's a lot of different things. I think it's someone who, as I mentioned, is really willing to give you their energy, their time, and invest in you and show that. I'm going to, again, just highlight Nancy Rogers here. She's been, my ally throughout my entire career. But not only is she educating me on the law and making sure I'm hopefully a darn good attorney, but she's bringing me to every single networking event that she possibly can, and introducing me to people. And it's not just here's the handshake, but it's here's this is Nicole. Here's why she's great. Here's why you should know her, and setting that person up for success. Again, I think a lot of real estate industry people who are ingrained in the industry just have so many tools that a lot of others don't, whether or not it's just younger people who don't have access to that type of stuff, but also people of color who aren't from around here and just don't have those connections. So I think that's what it looks like. I think it's also just someone who's willing to have the conversation, to be honest. I think someone who creates a space to have a potentially uncomfortable conversation, and just being willing to have that conversation. Maybe you're not going to agree, but to be able to have, sort of a common understanding and be speaking in somewhat of a common language. I think just knowing that person is out there and exists and is willing to listen to you, and also still willing and wanting to help you succeed. I think that's what an ally is. I don't think an ally is someone who, is going to sacrifice everything that they have for you, or, going to, always, help you climb the ladder necessarily, but it's someone who's going to constantly be invested in your success and showing that. Yeah.
Thanks. Deji, maybe you can answer this second one for us. So the conversation about promoting diversity within our firms has been really valuable. And so this question is, can you please discuss ideas of ways people can also better encourage diversity in the broader industry? How do we engage with mentoring, expand our own networks, etc.?
I think it's partly individual based. And also, it's also finding those, mentors, like I mentioned earlier, right? And I've had, certain mentors make introductions on my behalf to certain people in the industry, just to broader my network. And it's also me taking initiative as well to, meet new people and learn new ideas. So, for example, there's an executive at a larger multifamily firm, in Seattle, and, over the last year, I did some consulting work for the executive, and he was getting feedback to think more broadly about a particular aspect of the real estate industry to help me grow my knowledge base about the industry to be a better professional. So I think it takes both the individual as well as leaders, peers, and others in the industry to be able to share ideas and talk about ways to be a better real estate professional. So that's kind of
Thanks.
Okay.
I know the NAIOP Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee also really wants to be a resource in this department for NAIOP Washington. The co-chairs and the committee members are very gung-ho. A lot of them are leading big, large-scale efforts at their own firms, and they really want to be able to help the small firms, help the firms who are just getting going, always be here as a resource for other members. So I do want people to keep that in mind as well. And so here's another question we have, and maybe you all have a little bit to offer here. What are you or your firms doing to build the pipeline of diverse high school or college candidates and attract them to the commercial real estate industry? I know if Jonathan was here, he would say, hey, let's not forget about the Brotherhood Initiative at the University of Washington. For me, near and dear to my heart is the African American Male Achievement Initiative in Seattle Public Schools, whether it's starting early in third grade reading scores or working with high school students to get them summer internships in the industry. What have you seen going on in Seattle that you are hopeful about?
I'm going to start with a sad reality check, which is I haven't seen enough, to be honest. And I don't think any of us are really doing enough. I think, talking about pre-recruitment, if we go even further than that, we first have to make sure that we have a really good diverse candidate pool, right? And I think that's, that's a bigger issue here. But in terms of, outreach that we've done as a firm, I know we support Rainier Scholars, which is to sponsor, people of color who are now in undergraduate programs actually throughout the country, but there's also a handful of them at UW. So that's one thing we've done. But I do really just agree with that sentiment and that concept that, it really does start at that undergraduate level as well. And whether or not it's through, a NAIOP, whether or not it's through like the DEI committee, working with various companies to create some sort of an outreach program with, a club at UW or, Seattle U or somewhere where you can have that early engagement with these communities. Again, I think once you start establishing that relationship and become a known company who supports diversity, that really gets you in the ground level and gets your name out there as someone who's really taking this seriously. And word of mouth, relationship building, all of that is going to eventually, hopefully, turn into not only a diverse candidate pool but diverse hires.
Thanks. I know the unions are doing a lot of work in the construction trades too, where they're working with high schoolers and trying to bring them in. And so I would say to a development firm or a real estate firm, if you've got a good relationship with the contractors and the construction workers and some of the unions, that's a great place to build relationships and recruit talent as well at an early age. Any finishing thoughts? How about from you, Uche, since we cut you off from giving us your final 2 cents?
Well, I definitely think that it's really important for candidates to be able to see diversity reflected in the sector, and in order for them to feel like this is actually someplace that I can be successful in, that I can feel like I belong, that I feel welcomed. I think that that's really important. We work with HTC. They have an internship program for BIPOC members who are in both undergrad and graduate school, so that they can at least get exposure to the sector, so that they can see whether or not this is someplace that they feel like they could thrive in. And I think that that's great to encourage more and more folks, because, commercial real estate, you have this picture in your mind of what that looks like. And I think that that's changing, and it's important for, the companies in that sector to reflect that.
I'm just going to quickly add to that. I think Uche brought up a really good point here, which is, I think individually as companies, the hope is that we're all taking diversity seriously and we think there's merit in diversity. But, as the world's evolving, I think it's also important to remember that the market is evolving and clients are evolving. I know my firm, we often see in RFPs direct questions about, what are you doing to further diversity? What is the composition of your, diverse employees? So that's now a direct known factor within the calculation of whether or not your company may, get a deal or get a job or get, hired. So I think that's just an important element to realize that tide is shifting in that way as well. So whether or not it's, diversity just because it's the right thing to do, or also because that's what the market is starting to demand. I think it's, it's time for people to start getting on board with it is the
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And we hope you'll join us in the networking session. We'll all be there to hang out, take more questions, and have the conversation keep going. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Mel Webb now. Thanks, Mel. All right, well, it sounds like Mel's having a bit of technical difficulties, so we are going to thank our sponsors once again: DPR Construction, Hermanson, Holland Partner Group, Hudson Pacific Properties, MG2, Schuchart, Skanska, and Stokes Lawrence. Thank you so much. Boots Construction, Gensler, Invesco, LBA Realty, McKinstry, and Mortensen. Callison RTKL, Coughlin Porter Lundeen, PSF Mechanical, and DWLS. Thank you so much for being our sponsors today. And we will see you in the networking session. Thanks, everyone.